there was this general, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was working for Caesar. And he decided to take one of the slaves that was there underneath him. And the story goes that he started to teach the slave how to think using the Trivium Method. And eventually Caesar finds out that that's what's going on. And Caesar says something to the effect of, "You can't teach him this. If you teach him this, he won't want to be a slave anymore. And then he'll pass it on to other people that are slaves, and then we will have a huge problem on our hands." Hello, and welcome to the Forbidden Knowledge Podcast. My name is Nathaniel Heutmaker, and I will be your host. In the last few episodes, we've been going over honesty and the importance of doing so, and how if you stray from being honest in your various different endeavors, including with yourself and with other people, all the problems that it occurs from it, and how it's actually against what the world even demands of us from a strictly pure point of view when looking at things. So I think we've covered that topic enough for the beginning of all this and just the basics of the season, and we will be continuing onward. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the very basic, bare-bones structure of how to think. But before we get into that, I want to explain the difference between what to think and how to think. In our modern era, most people think that they know how to think, but in reality, most of their thoughts are not their own. And they have no way of knowing how to distinguish between what is their own thought, what isn't their own thought, and whether the thoughts that they have and have been handed to them make any sense. We think that because we've been educated through public schools or through private schools or whatever the deal is that we've gotten from it, that means that we have a mark of an educated mind. This is true to a certain extent, but it also makes it so that way, are these your own thoughts? Do you know how to distinguish between the thoughts that you've learned in whatever textbook that you've read versus whatever your own view is on a particular subject? How do we make decisions when we have conflicting information? See, a lot of the time in school, they make it so that way all you do is regurgitate information. That's not thinking. That's just making it so that way you parrot back what you've learned. That's a robot. A robot can tell you to do that. You type in 2 + 2 = 4, and it says 4 whenever you type that in. That's not a human being. That's not thinking. That's just regurgitating anything with it. But the problem becomes when we take on these thoughts and make them our worldview. So, as an example, if I take on a particular thought about something that's not my own, then someone comes and says, "Hey, that particular thought is stupid, and here's the reason why." Most people, because they've added it to their identity of who they are, rather than viewing it as just, say, technical knowledge and understanding of how the world works, they go and they get offended by it, and then they lash out at the person who's telling them that that's not their own thought, or that it's a stupid thought, or whatever the deal is that's going on that particular point for things. And it makes it so that way people have done all sorts of, absurd things because of their beliefs. And what happens when their beliefs don't align with reality, or that the beliefs are given to somebody else, to them by somebody else? So how do we rectify this? What if what the belief you have is actually something that's antithetical to life and antithetical to truth and antithetical to decency? What then? How do we sort out whether we're doing the right thing or not? How do we sort out whether we're making it so that way, we're doing harm to somebody else or not? How do we make it so that way, when it comes to our own personal journey of achieving our goals, that these are actually our thoughts, and that this is actually what we want to do rather than what we've been told that we should do? An example that I gave earlier in this series was to make it so that way, when we had a client of mine that I brought up, he had his father tell him not to go after his dream when he was 12 years old. And because of that, he didn't go after it, and now he's in his mid-30s, and he's only started to really actively go after it now that he's working with me directly. But for 20-something years, he never went after his goal. How much time is wasted because of not being able to sort out a particular thought? Now, I don't blame him for what happened, and he shouldn't blame himself. He was a 12-year-old kid when this was told to him. But he didn't have any way of filtering out whether this was right for him to do or right for him not to do, or what his father was telling him made any sense or not, because he's 12 years old. And that's the thing is that we don't know what we're carrying around with us, how much it can impact our lives in a negative sense, simply because we can't be honest with ourselves. And even if we are trying to be honest with ourselves, that maybe we don't even know what is actually our thoughts and what aren't our thoughts. And so this is the difference between what to think and how to think. The what to think is, you've been told this, or you've read this, you've done this, blah, 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 somewhere else. Or it comes from somebody else's secondhand thing with it. And it makes it so that way those thoughts aren't your own thoughts. That doesn't mean you can't adopt them as your thoughts if you actually believe them, and if you actually understand what they're entailing and whatnot, and they make sense and all that other stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But it can be very detrimental if you take on the wrong thought, and you take on something that hurts you in terms of achieving your goals or achieving your dreams, or it hurts you in the sense of making it so that way you're doing harm to yourself and other people by going on a path that makes it so you're not having the very best possible life for yourself and for others, or that you're directly doing something that is not okay, and not realizing that it's not okay because you were brought up in that particular environment. You can see this with certain forms of people being, raised racist and that kind of thing. That skin tone matters somehow rather than the content of the character of the individual. Or you can also see this with certain people who are brought up in certain ideologies that are, that are not good and whatnot. People who believe in slavery, as an example, and whatnot. Doesn't matter what era it is. Anybody who believes that slavery is good, or that it is natural, or that there's nothing wrong with it, or it's just the way that things are, these people are having a mind virus inside of them that is not okay. And it makes it so that way it's hurting them and the world around them with it. It's okay to have a thought in your head that's not good. It's not okay to have that thought in your head in perpetuity, meaning forever. You need to be able to change your mind when presented with the proper evidence that makes it so that way you realize this is not okay, this was not a good thought, I should not continue to take actions based upon these thoughts. And so that's the other thing is that our thoughts determine our reality, because what we think about a particular situation, we might act on. And if we do act on those thoughts, then that becomes who we are as an individual. So we need to be very careful about what we take to heart inside of ourselves. If you take on something that's not good for you and not good for somebody else, then you're harming yourself and the world around you. If you're taking on something that's not good for you personally, then it makes it so that way you are living a life that is not what it could be in terms of the best option for yourself. And it makes it so that way you have to sort out what is proper and what is not proper in order to live a better life. And so this is why we need to do the shadow work in order to make it so that way we can do better for ourselves. Because the world desperately needs a better situation, not just for, individuals, but for everybody as a whole. And our world is created by individuals making decisions. And so if people have access to good information and they have access to good ways in order to weed out various different techniques of stuff that are not good for them and what is actually right and good, then they'll make better decisions and therefore we'll have a better world. But if you just follow the commands and dictates and orders of your parents, even if they're well-meaning, or of society, even if they're well-meaning, or of other people and that kind of stuff, or politicians and that kind of thing, and so-called leaders, what are their motivations? Why are they behaving the way that they are? And so this is what we're going to be going over the next few episodes at a minimum, is the basic understanding of how to think rather than what to think, and to make it so we can get the core of truth about any matter, assuming that there's enough information for you to go and do that. So what I'm going to be talking about next is something called the Trivium Method, and it's just an introduction. There's nothing really special about it in any way, shape, or form that I'm going to be doing in this particular episode. I'm literally just going to be giving an overview of how it works and how it was used by ancient people all over the world as a process for discovering truth. And it is the precursor that our ancient forebears used in order to make it so that way we can discover the world around us. And it's a precursor to what we would call the scientific method today. The true scientific method today. And one of the things I want to go into is a story very briefly. There was this general, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was working for Caesar. And he decided to take one of the slaves that was there underneath him. And the story goes that he started to teach the slave how to think using the Trivium Method. And eventually Caesar finds out that that's what's going on. And Caesar says something to the effect of, you can't teach him this. If you teach him this, he won't want to be a slave anymore. And then he'll pass it on to other people that are slaves, and then we will have a huge problem on our hands. I'm paraphrasing on purpose, but that's kind of what it came down to in terms of the basic understanding of it. So this was something that was so powerful, at least in Caesar's mind, that it could completely disrupt the established order that Rome had created for itself. And this general was going there and teaching it to someone who was a slave and making it so that way it was not okay for that to happen from the perspective of the ruler at the time period, because it would upset the established order. And that was just the way that it was. They don't want the rulers that are tyrants never want anybody to be able to stand up for themselves or on their own or think for themselves and on their own, because then they can't have anybody to rule over, or it becomes extremely difficult to rule over somebody. And so now, with that little story out of the way, we'll go into the Trivium Method and how it works as a whole. So I'm going to start with another quote that I think also helps illustrate what I'm trying to get at and talk about here. It's from Sir Thomas More, who lived between 1478 and 1535, from his book Utopia. For if you, the rulers, suffer your people to be ill-educated, and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this, but that you first make thieves, outlaws in that era, and then punish them? In other words, he's showing that the people that were in power at the time period created the system that made it so that way these people would be the way that they are, simply because they did not teach them how to think properly. And of course, we can see the accumulated effects of having omitted the Trivium Method, of learning how to learn from our school curriculums today. Our elementary schools, as we call them now, used to be called grammar schools. There's a reason for this, because they were teaching the grammar, as it's known, as the first step of the Trivium Method. And the Trivium Method also has logic and rhetoric as the other two steps for what's going on. And to put this in modern parlance, the easiest way to understand this would be input for the grammar stage, processing for the logic stage, and rhetoric for the output stage. In other words, when you're doing the grammar stage, you're getting all of your information that you need on a particular topic in order, and then you're going to have all that set up and ready, which makes it so that way you have the input. Then you're going to use logic and look for any inconsistencies that you can find in it and use various different techniques in order to make it so that way you can process that information. This goes over here, that goes over there. This makes it so that way we know what actually happened. There's contradictions between these two sides. Maybe this one's propaganda. Maybe they're both propaganda. You have to sort all that out. Or, you could also have it to where it's just something else entirely, to where it's like, well, this is not the results I expected based upon our current understanding of science, and it gave us a completely different result. So how do we rectify this situation now that we've done an experiment? And then the last step, the output, would be whatever it is that you get from the first two stages. So the information or lack thereof, the ability to process correctly the information that's been handing to you, or lack thereof, and then the output that stems from it. This is what the basics of the Trivium Method are. So the next thing I'm going to bring up is the meaning of what the Trivium Method means, like the actual literal meaning of it, and something that we've all probably heard of at one point or another in our lives, the 7 classical liberal arts, but may not be familiar with, in which the Trivium Method is the first 3 of the classical liberal arts, with the next 4 being arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So together they form an integrated classical trivium, which is a Latin word meaning the place where 3 roads meet. Of course, for those are the 3 metaphorical roads listed above, aka input, processing, output, or, as we also mentioned earlier, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, as it was known to the ancients. However, to avoid confusion, we'll just call them parts or steps from here on. So these steps also form the first 3 of the classical liberal arts and sciences. The last 4 parts were collectively called the quadrivium. When you have this, as I mentioned earlier, arithmetic, or number, geometry, number in space, music, or number in time, and finally astronomy, the 4th one, or number in space and time. So as you can see, each step builds upon itself in terms of the quadrivium as well. You have number, then you got number in time, number in space, then number in time, and then number in space and time. So they keep building on top of each other in terms of how you can use them and what you're going to be using them for. And this makes it so that way you can go and do much better for the understanding of the world around you. With arithmetic, you can do basic math and make it so that way you can, make sure that you have the proper number of things that you need with it. With geometry, you can start to understand the grand design of the universe and how it came into being, as well as making it so that way you can go and build things properly for yourself and do all these other things that are going on. Music makes it so that way we use an entire global process of our brain so we can be creative with numbers and make it so that way we can connect with other people and have a generative process that goes inside of us. And then astronomy connects us to the cosmos above us and make it so that way we can see the grand majesty of life all around us, and maybe perhaps even make it so that way we can discover what our purpose is and why we're here, and other things that the ancients asked themselves when they looked upon the stars and the sky and whatnot. Anyway, this is what the 7 classical liberal arts were, the trivium and the quadrivium combined. So now I'm going to continue on with the basics of the Trivium Method, and we're going to break it down. The first step is grammar. which literally just means knowledge of that which exists in terms of how it's used in the Trivium method. All right. And it answers the 4 questions of a subject: who, what, where, when. So the who are the entities that are involved, what is what transpired, where is location, and when is time. Logic, which is understanding, it is just the understanding of the interrelationships of that which exist, which we answered in the who, what, where, and when. And this answers the why of the subject, why they did what they did, what transpired the way that it did, the reason why they were at the location, and time that they were doing with it. And then, of course, rhetoric, which is communication of grammar and logic, or the first 2 steps of it, which would be input and processing, makes it so that way provides the how of the subject. So if we take a particular subject, let's say that we're taking medicine as an example for what's going on, then you would make it so that way you start with asking the questions of who was involved, what happened, where does it hurt. These could be if you have multiple patients and whatnot, and where where it hurts inside of them, the time that it happened, like how long ago, how long the symptoms have been on with it. Then they have to figure out the why of all these things with it. And then once that's done, then they can come up with a way of dealing with that. And that becomes the how of the subject, how to take all the information that has been put together and take action in the world based upon it and make a good decision. That's literally how, well, every single version of any particular field works. You have to answer all these questions, and then you have to make it so that way you can understand it. So this is literally a breakdown process of every subject that there is and how to learn it properly. And even one subjects we haven't even discovered yet or don't understand exist yet, because we haven't gotten the basic grammar in order to know that they even do exist. So this is what's happening in this particular thing, and I'm trying to show you the power of being able to have this particular method at your disposal. So this is the order that you have to do everything in, no matter what subject you're doing it is, and how long you think that you've been an expert at a particular subject. This is what you have to do every time a particular subject matter comes up with it, because our understanding of things constantly change. We get new knowledge, we get new information, we have new experiences, whatever. So the trivium is presented to in the grammar stage, and this is where you take raw data and you just gather factual data into a coherent body of knowledge. Then in the next stage, the logic stage or the processing stage, in order to gain understanding of that body, you have to systematically eliminate all found contradictions within it to the best possible that you can. You can use basic logical skills in terms of figuring out whether what's being done makes any sense whatsoever, and that's not hard to do for certain fields. But then each field has its own tools to help with that. Archaeology is going to have a different method for figuring out truth than medicine will. Than you would in chemistry, or than you would in what you would do for linguistics, as an example. Each one has their own way of trying to process and eliminate the data that has contradictions in it to make it so that way you can go on to the next stage, the rhetoric stage, which is where you wisely express and utilize the valid knowledge and understanding in the real world. It is especially important to remember, though, that when you ask questions such as what, that there is no presupposition on it, meaning that you don't have a preconceived idea of what's going on, that you don't have a notion of what's going to occur ahead of time when it comes to this. A perfect example of this is that a man treating a woman poorly does not prove the existence of a patriarchy, or that men in general oppress women. Why? Because the man might treat other men the same way, for starters, and some women might treat other women poorly in the exact same way. Ergo, in this particular example, just because you see it happen one time, you might need more data in order to reach a particular conclusion about what's going on. So you don't want to come to conclusion too early about certain topics when it comes to this too. And it's very important to make sure that you gather as much data as you can on a subject and from as many different sources as you can in order to make it so that way you can truly, fully grasp a subject matter. Now, of course, you might be thinking, I don't have time for all this. Well, okay. If you really care about the subject, then you'll make time for it. And the reason why I bring that up is because when it comes to your personal life and what we're trying to do here, if you want to spend your entire life being on the wrong track and feeling like you're lost in your life and all of that, then you're right. You don't want to do that. You want to move as quickly in quotation marks as possible, rather than making it so that way you actually make the correct decision for yourself and then keep moving forward. See, this is where people stumble around a lot, as they keep thinking that they know what they want, when in reality they don't know what they want out of life, because they haven't done enough reflective work on themselves in order to understand what they truly want to do with their lives and what they truly want to get out of life. Now, back to the Trivium method in terms of me teaching you some of the basics. So, in the beginning stages, in this case, the gathering of data information, the input stage, what was formerly called grammar, each way of doing things might be different. So as an example, if you want to take actual grammar rules from actual languages, English is going to be different from Russian or from Latin or from Hindi or from Quechua, whatever. And you have to understand the basic rules of that particular language first before you can start actually using the language properly and whatnot. This is the same thing for any particular field of human knowledge and endeavor. There are certain things you have to understand about stuff before you can do it. Now, some of it is instinctual, like walking. We can see that other humans are walking, and as a child, we want to imitate our parents and other adults around us who are capable of walking. So we believe that we can, and then eventually we make a bunch of mistakes along the way, falling over and all that other stuff, and eventually we figure it out and we can walk. Some of it we don't need to have words for and a rule book for and all that other stuff because it's just part of life. Other things, though, certain disciplines, you need to be able to make it so that way you understand the rules of that particular discipline in order to be able to understand how it functions and work and why they have that particular rule sets for things and knowledge of things in order to be able to speak that. That's why, there's medical terminology for medicine, which is different than, other fields of science and whatnot. Some of it overlaps, of course, because they're using Latin, but the point is that you need to understand the stuff that's actually going on inside of yourself. And this is how make it so that when you understand these rules, then you can go much further and go on to the next stage of whatever particular thing that you're trying to work on and fully comprehend. So in the logic stage and the processing stage, the whole point of it is to develop the faculty of reason and establish valid, non-contradictory relationships among the facts. It also makes it so that way you can have basic systematic understanding and guide the thinking for correct understanding of any particular topic without logical fallacies. It is the art of non-contradictory identification of things. And so you need to make it so that way we can tie it to the real objective world around you. If we, as just human species, claim that we want peace, and we currently don't have peace because we're at war, all the time in conflict with ourselves and with other people, then there are certain conditions that have not yet been met in order to make it so that way we can have peace or abundance or whatever it is else that we claim that we want as a species and as individuals. And so we have to be able to honestly answer and look at those facts and look at what they are for ourselves and that kind of stuff. And so the whole point of using the logic stage of things in order to make it so we can get what we want out of stuff is to tie it to objective reality and to make it so that way we can bring our subjective thoughts of the mind and our subsequent actions of the body into harmony with the rhythm of the objective universe. It's a poetic way of saying just make it so we align ourselves with reality and actually do things that need to be done in a proper sense for it. This does not mean we ignore our impulses in the sense of like how we feel about a particular situation. It depends on what it is. If you're angry at a fact because you don't like the fact because it goes against your particular belief system about something, that doesn't change the fact. It just means that you don't like the fact and it's challenging what you currently hold on to. However, in the case of making it so that way it's a dream of yours and it's actually a real dream, which will go making it into reality later and determining how to come to that conclusion of what you want to do with your life that's actually beneficial to yourself and to other people, then that's something that's unique to you that is subjective, but it is also objectively true that if you go and do another path that isn't that way, you're going to be miserable and unfulfilled, and you're going to take that out on other people, and it makes it so that way everybody else is going to have more nonsense that they have to deal with, and you're never going to be truly happy and fulfilled in your life. So you need to take your subjective aspects of yourself and use it to fit with the reality that's around you to make it so that way you can go and do better things. A very simple understanding of this is that if you're hungry, you need to eat. Subjectively, you feel hungry for what it is. It's not something that can be expressed outwardly or shown 100%. Maybe, you consider grumbling of the tummy and whatnot as something that's going on with it. But the point is that it's a feeling inside of you that you have, and objectively you need to take care of that particular feeling, in order to make that happen. This could be true of other things that come up, even natural stuff too. But there's a bridging of the gap that has to happen. You can be thirsty, you can do whatever it needs to be done. So that's what I mean here by bringing your subjective thoughts of mind and then your subsequent actions of the body into harmony with the rhythm of the objective universe. All right, and on to rhetoric now, or the output. So this step applies knowledge and understanding, and when you apply knowledge and understanding to something, you automatically get wisdom. And so this step consists of usable knowledge that allows one to explore and find the proper choice for coherently expressing whatever conclusions it have come to based upon the first two stages. Naturally, those would be the conclusions reached through those stages, and any subject, whether it may be in writing or verbal argumentation or whatever. So this makes it so that way you can actually take what you found and use it in the real world. That's all that the rhetoric stage is in terms of how to apply it into your real life, or the output stage of things with it. It's not really a hard step to understand in any way, shape, or form. And it is the final result out of the previous two steps and gives you the how of something, like how you can achieve your goal, or at least how you can figure out the next step of what needs to be done for your goal. Say your goal is a much more ambitious goal, like getting people to live on Mars. You're going to have to figure out a lot of hows to make that happen, and you're going to have a high level of understanding of things in comparison to, say, making it so that way I can, just put a shirt on or whatever the deal is. A very simple thing that most people can do every day in comparison to the amount of level of understanding that we need to have in order to survive on another planet. But it's the same process. All right, this might be getting a little heady for most people, so I'm just going to try to make this simplified and easy for this last little bit. The system as a whole is making it so that way you have knowledge, then once you have that knowledge, you get understanding. From it, you'll be able to make it so that way you get wisdom, which allows true learning. So, first stage is discovering and arranging a body of knowledge under general grammar, aka the rules of that particular system. The second part is fully understanding that knowledge under formalized logic in order to make it so that way you can get the desired results for yourself and weed out any contradictions that are going to hamper whatever your goals are. Finally, when you get to the last stage, this will allow the expressing of that knowledge and understanding. And the above are three distinctly different but interrelated disciplines that yield objective, verifiable truth when applied as an integrated unit. This is all that it is. It's a system of scientific method that you can do for yourself on any topic. You can do it in your internal world as well, and making it so that way that's the case for that. You can figure out why you're angry about something, or how anger even arises inside of you as an individual. If you make it so that way you take the cases of all the anger that you have with it, or multiple with it, just like we've talked about before, you can't just do it with one. Okay, I have 100 of these cases. Is there something I can learn from this anger that pops up with it? Yeah, okay. I'm angry when people do this. I'm angry when this happens. I'm angry when that happens. I'm not angry when these things happen, though. When I thought that I would be, when really it's some other feeling that I have. Whatever the case is, it allows us to go and do that. This is a system to make it so that way you can do it for anything for what's going on. It is something that's not divided up into various different types of knowledge. Different types of knowledge would be stuff that we've touched on before. The medical field, finance, history, archaeology, linguistics, or whatever it is that you're doing. These are all different fields of knowledge, and making it so that way you understand that particular body of knowledge is going through the same step and process every time. So this is what the Trivium Method is about. It's an introduction to it. I hope that you find this interesting. I know that's probably not something that's a fun topic, but it is an extremely useful topic, and we're going to dive into it a couple more episodes probably, and just get the basics down so that way you can take this and use it for yourself in various different aspects of your life. If you've enjoyed this episode, I would really encourage you to make it so that way you subscribe to the podcast and make it so that way you leave a rating for it. It'll really help us out a lot. Also, if you are so inclined to do so and want to get more information about stuff regarding anything that has happened on this podcast season thus far, then please sign up to my email list in order to make it so that way you can stay in constant contact and get new information and updates about new opportunities all the time, including the fact of making it so that way you can work with me one-on-one as a client. Thank you very much. I hope you've all gotten something out of this. We will continue on with the important aspects of the Trivium Method, aka how to think, in the next episode.